And he's under direct orders not to die out there. And that's one set of orders he's actually planning on following.
Isn't quarantine fun? Getting to stay home, chill with your pets or loved ones, and watch a grotesque amount of movies and television shows on all of the major streaming platforms. And what better way to forget about the current state of things than watching a movie that covers the worst case scenario of a virus outbreak, sort of similar to what we have going on today. And hey, I can't complain, as it gives me the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite movies from the mid-90s, the Dustin Hoffman-led biological thriller, Outbreak. While not a great movie by any stretch of the imagination, it is certainly entertaining enough. And there are a handful of little things about the movie that you might not know about, especially upon your first viewing, which is what this video is all about. Now, it might not be the most Easter egg-filled flick, but there are some cool little things to talk about. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Should I give a spoiler warning for a 25-year-old movie? Cause this video is gonna be chock full of spoilers. So maybe watch the film first if you haven't already. Then again, you have had 25 years to watch the movie, so... With all that nonsense out of the way, let's jump into talking about things you might not know about 1995's Outbreak. Let's dive right into it.
No, it's true. I kid you.
Let's start this video off in the same way that the actual movie does, with a quote by a famous Nobel laureate. The actual quote was, "The single biggest threat to man's continued dominance on the planet is the virus." And this rather ominous sounding line was actually said by Dr. Joshua Lederberg, an American microbiologist renowned for his work in microbial genetics. In 1958, Lederberg won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, alongside Edward Tatum and George Beadle, for their work discovering bacterial conjugation, the process through which bacteria transfer genetic material by either direct cell-to-cell contact or via a sort of organic, tube-like connection between the two. Didn't think you'd learn about microbiology while you were watching a ScreenRant video, did ya? Well, strap in, cause there's more where that came from later on in this video. Anyways, Lederberg went on to work in other fields of study, such as artificial intelligence, and even lent his skills to the United States space program, where he helped the search for microbial life on Mars. Lederberg sadly passed away in February 2008 at the age of 82. After his passing in the year 2012, a massive impact crater on Mars was named after him. The film begins with a flashback to the year 1967 in the African country of Zaire. What we see appears to be a viral outbreak in the middle of an active war zone. Now, a lot of media representations of African countries portray them as being constantly war-torn. However, in this case, it's actually not too far from how things actually were in Zaire back in the 1960s. See, at that time, the country was going through a rather large amount of political unrest, due in large part to the rise in power of Joseph Mobutu. Mobutu seized power in 1965 and installed himself as president of the country. After this, he instituted some rather serious changes, some of which didn't exactly go over too well with the people. While outright civil war didn't exactly break out, there were those who stood against him. So it is possible that this is the conflict that we are seeing in the movie. Why they decided to showcase this and not just have the outbreak occur in some random village or something, we may never know. Either way, it was at least fairly accurate for a mid-90s thriller, which you would not expect from something like this. For a rather large part of the film, the main cast members are completely covered head to toe in these fancy schmancy suits that are meant to keep them safe from the virus that is infecting the small town of Cedar Creek. Now, we see suits like this in films and TV shows all the time, but what exactly are they? Well, they are a form of decontamination suits, more commonly referred to as hazmat suits, which itself is short for hazardous materials suit. These suits are used in a wide variety of situations, ranging from, of course, viral and biological infections like we see in the film, but also when dealing with nuclear materials, chemical agents, or even something as simple as high temperatures and fire. Obviously, each situation calls for a slightly different type of suit, but on the whole, they are largely the same. One thing that you might notice though, looking at these pictures of real-world suits, is that it's not all that easy to see the faces of the people wearing them, unlike the ones in the movie. So what gives? While there are some suits that provide an unobscured look at the wearer's face, such as these suits being worn by NASA workers dealing with rocket fuel, most don't. For the film, the costume designers had to create a suit that appeared functional while still allowing us to see the actors' faces. And I mean, it does make sense. You don't pay for Dustin Hoffman, Rene Russo, or Cuba Gooding Jr. and then hide them behind a face mask. That just wouldn't make a ton of sense from a filmmaking standpoint. As you probably would expect, the virus in Outbreak isn't actually a real virus, but it is extremely similar to an entire family of illnesses, known as viral hemorrhagic fever, which is extremely difficult to say. So going forward, I'm just gonna say the abbreviated VHF. VHFs often cause, as the name would lead you to believe, bleeding and an extremely high fever. They also tend to come with swelling, low blood pressure, muscle pain, red and purple spots, and vomiting. Sounds like a really fun time. And the virus in the film does seem to fit the symptoms pretty well. Some examples of VHF include the hantavirus, which was actually the virus that Daniels was supposed to go deal with in New Mexico. And of course, Ebola, the virus that we had a bit of a scare surrounding a few years ago. There have actually been reports of some countries trying to weaponize VHFs, just like we see the government trying to do in the movie. Back in the day, a Soviet defector claimed that China allegedly tried to weaponize a VHF in the 80s, but abandoned their attempts after an outbreak. Probably for the best. This really seems like the kind of thing that we should be trying to completely exterminate, not dropping it on other human beings. It's just some really, really awful stuff. Speaking of VHFs, let's take a second and have a little bit of a breather from all this heavier stuff to talk about a little detail about how the film itself was made. Anyhooser, you know the scene early on where they are trying to identify the virus in the military lab? And they bring up the close-up pic of the virus on a screen? Look at it really close. If you're not someone who is familiar with viruses, it might just look like a random shape. But compare it to this image, which is a magnified view of the Ebola virus. You might immediately begin to see where the filmmakers may have gotten their image. It basically just looks like that they took that tail part there and flipped it. Could be a different virus that is related to Ebola, but in my research, that's the closest visual match that I could find. So if you know which virus that actually is, if it is indeed just another one besides Ebola, let me know down in the comments. I'd actually really love to hear about it. Now back into the heavy stuff, because that's what this video is. One of the major plot points in the film is the fact that the virus is brought into the US via a small little monkey, who proceeds to spit in a dude's face and go to town biting a dude's arm, transferring the illness to both of them. But how realistic is this? Sure, animals can bite you and give you something like rabies, but a VHF like the one we see in the movie? Well, yeah, it can happen. A disease or illness that is transferable from animals to humans is called zoonosis. And as we see in the movie, this transfer can occur via both saliva and bites, in addition to via airborne means. So yeah, a monkey could cough in your general vicinity and pass a VHF onto you. That's pretty rough. It is worth noting though that the third way is the least common means of transfer in regards to zoonosis. The most common example of this is of course rabies, as I mentioned earlier. But there are some more serious illnesses that can be transferred this way as well, including Ebola, everyone's favorite VHF. Heck, it's worth noting that HIV started out as a disease that was transferred from animals to humans. That's how it all started. However, over the years, HIV has mutated to the point that it is no longer transferable in such a manner. So do animals who have these viruses have to deal with the symptoms in the same way as us humans? Like we see with the other monkey in the movie? Well, that actually depends on the specific virus. Some do, but for the most part, not really. At least, not in the same manner. Due to the differences in our genetic makeup, things don't always affect all species the same way. Speaking of the spread of the illness, Outbreak does a pretty good job of illustrating just how fast viruses can spread. Within the span of maybe 12 hours or so, we see one guy get spit on, another bit, a woman kissed by the guy who got spit on, a medical worker getting sprayed by blood, and an entire theater is subjected to a sick guy coughing and putting his grubby hands just all over everything in the lobby. It's altogether just a hodgepodge of grossness. While this virus is of course hyper contagious, this is actually a pretty prime example of how quickly one guy being sick can become 2, then 4, then 8, and on and on and on. As people come into contact with each other, viruses spread. This isn't just something made up for the sake of movies. I mean, that's why a lot of us are working from home or just chilling in our beds. These things spread a lot faster and a lot easier than most people realize. Let's step away from the biological side of the film and talk about the military side of things for a change. Specifically, the bomb that they tried to drop on Cedar Creek at the end of the movie. Because yes, it is a real thing, and it's really horrifying. A fuel-air explosive, or FAE, is actually a weapon that falls under the category of a thermobaric weapon, also known as an aerosol or vacuum bomb. These weapons use oxygen from the surrounding area to produce a superheated blast wave that is considerably more effective against fortifications than traditional explosives, mainly because they are physically heating the oxygen in the area, and you can't really escape oxygen. They are also really good at wiping out airborne agents in a particular area, since they basically cook every molecule within a certain radius. Thermobaric weapons have some downsides though. Due to their reliance on oxygen, they can't really be used underwater, or in locations with thinner air, such as at higher altitudes. Oh, and adverse weather also has a serious effect on them, so don't try using one in a hurricane. And over the years, there have actually been discussions about whether or not the use of thermobaric weapons is humane, and therefore, whether or not they should be banned. This comes down largely to how the blast actually takes people out. Unlike traditional explosives, it's not really the blast that you need to worry about necessarily. People hit with this weapon burn alive, and if they don't cook almost immediately, they burn from the inside out when they try to breathe. It's not really a nice way to go. So yeah, it's completely understandable why Daniels would want to stop the bombing, not just to save the people in the town, but also to stop them from experiencing a rather horrific end. In the latter half of the film, the plot shifts from trying to figure out exactly what is going on with the illness to trying to track down the monkey who first spread the virus. The host, as they refer to it. The idea being that if they find the host, they could take some of its blood and use the antibodies that are in said blood to synthesize a cure for the illness. We'll get to that part here in a little bit. Gotta wonder though, is this a possible solution for an outbreak like this? Could you just track down a host and take some of its blood and make a cure? Well, kind of. See, one key way to fight off an illness is antibodies. Antibodies are basically a type of protein that is used by the immune system to fend off and neutralize pathogens. Each antibody recognizes unique molecules within the specific pathogen that it is meant to deal with, known as the antigen, and can sort of bind with it. In simplified terms, this sort of tags the pathogen and allows the immune system to more easily identify and attack the foreign invader. It's how your immune system can learn to fight off stuff. It's why once you get the chicken pox, you can't really get them again. Once you get them, you have those antibodies. It's also the whole concept behind vaccines. So, theoretically, if you could get a hold of someone or something that has antibodies for a specific pathogen, you could potentially produce a serum from them that could be used to fight off the illness. Again, in theory, it's a bit more complicated than that, way too complicated for the scope of this video. Leave a like down below if you want us to do a really deep dive on how medicines are made. Now, okay, for the sake of discussion, let's say that someone did get a hold of some antibodies and wanted to synthesize a serum to deal with the illness. Would it be something that you could do in a matter of hours like we see in the movie? Well, yeah, no. It's not something that can be done that fast. Developing cures and vaccines can take whole teams of people a long time, even under optimal circumstances. However, the film does have a built-in solution for this problem. In a single line that you might not have caught in the excitement at the end of the movie, Daniels tells Salt to use the E1101 serum as a basis for their new cure. So they effectively already have the foundation and just need to slap in the new antibodies to create a cure for the mutated virus. Bing bang boom, solution for a bit of a problem hidden in a throwaway line. At least that's the idea that the movie is presenting. Again, it's not that simple, but within the context of a movie, I guess we'll just have to suspend our disbelief for that one. What did you think of Outbreak? What are you doing while you're hanging out at home right now? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below, and while you're down there, why not consider subscribing to ScreenRant for more awesome content just like this. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you when this is all over at the movies.